The morning sun shimmered like liquid gold across the glassy surface of the Grant family's infinity pool. The entire estate was silent, as it always was. Not a bird's song, not a laugh, just the soft hum of fountains and the distant echo of wealth. Clara clutched the silver tray in her trembling hands. Her new uniform was too stiff, the shoes a little too big. She had only started that morning, and the butler's warning still rang in her ears. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not touch the children. And above all, do not disturb their peace. She walked out to the poolside where the twins sat, Ethan and Ella, both dressed immaculately in white. They looked like porcelain dolls, motionless, their faces blank. They were just 7, but their eyes were far older than they should have been. Good morning, Clara said softly, her voice uncertain. I brought lemonade. No response. No movement. Only the faint rustle of the wind through the palms. She knelt to pour the drinks, feeling their gaze, cold and assessing, on her back. To break the tension, she tried a small, awkward smile. It's such a pretty day, isn't it? Still nothing. Her hand shook slightly as she placed the glasses on the edge of the pool. The sun was hot, and sweat slid down her neck. She shifted her footing, and suddenly, the heel of her shoe caught on the edge of a pool tile. The world tilted. The tray flew from her hands, a flash of silver and sparkling lemonade catching the light before splashing into the water. Clara yelped as she lost her balance and tumbled headfirst into the pool with a loud splash. For a moment, silence. Bubbles, water, shock, then her head broke the surface, her hair dripping, her uniform clinging. She gasped, blinking through the water, humiliated. Oh no, I'm so sorry. But then she froze. A sound, small, delicate, and completely unexpected, reached her ears. It was a giggle. She looked up. Ethan's lips had curved into a smile. Ella's shoulders were shaking with laughter. It wasn't forced, it was real. Bright, musical laughter that filled the empty space like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Clara blinked, stunned. She started to laugh too, half from embarrassment and half from relief. From the balcony above, Alexander Grant stood motionless, watching the scene unfold. His hand, which had been clutching his morning coffee, loosened. For 5 years, he hadn't heard that sound, his children's laughter. Now, because of a simple maid's clumsy fall, the silence of his mansion had finally been broken. The following days felt different in the Grant mansion, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The air no longer hung heavy with silence, there were traces of life now, faint ripples of sound. It began with whispers, then giggles echoing through the corridors. The twins, who once hid behind blank stares, now trailed behind Clara like two little shadows. Every morning, Clara found them waiting by the kitchen door before breakfast. Ethan would pretend he wasn't, crossing his arms with a frown, but his eyes would flick toward her every few seconds. Ella, more open, would tug at Clara's apron and whisper, "Will you tell us another funny story?" Clara, who had grown up with younger siblings of her own, was quick to respond with warmth. She'd sit them at the long dining table and turn mundane chores into adventures. Folding napkins became, building castles, dusting became, catching invisible fairies. The children laughed, their voices bouncing off the marble walls like music the house hadn't heard in years. From the balcony, Alexander often watched them in silence. He didn't understand this woman, how someone with such simple manners could have achieved what doctors, tutors, and therapists could not. There was something in her, a light that refused to dim. One afternoon, he joined them by the pool. The twins were chasing bubbles Clara blew from a small wand, their laughter ringing through the air. When Clara noticed him, she quickly stood up, flustered. "Sir, I'm sorry if we're being too loud," she said, brushing her hands nervously on her skirt. Alexander shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Don't apologize." His gaze shifted to the twins. "I haven't heard them sound like that in years." Clara smiled, her eyes soft. "Children don't forget how to laugh, sir. Sometimes, they just need someone to remind them." Something stirred in Alexander, a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. He realized, painfully, that for years he had surrounded his children with everything money could buy, except what they needed most, warmth. Later that evening, as the house settled into twilight, the twins insisted that Clara tuck them into bed. It had been years since they'd asked anyone to do that. She read them a simple bedtime story about a lost bird finding its home again. Halfway through, both were asleep, small smiles still lingering on their faces. When she turned to leave, she noticed Alexander standing at the doorway, watching quietly. The light from the hallway framed him, his usually stern expression softened. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. Clara nodded, unsure how to respond. "I'm just doing my job, sir." But he shook his head slightly. "No," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You're doing much more than that." Outside, the night air was cool and still. Inside, for the first time in half a decade, the Grant mansion felt like a home. The evening of the dinner invitation felt charged, as though the mansion itself held its breath. The grand dining hall, usually reserved for formal events, had been prepared with delicate candlelight and fresh flowers. The long mahogany table gleamed, polished to perfection. Crystal glasses shimmered under the chandelier's golden glow. Clara stood at the doorway in disbelief when she saw her name on the seating chart, next to Alexander Grant. She had never dined with the family before, maids didn't dine with millionaires. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her plain blue dress, the only decent one she owned. When she entered, Alexander rose from his seat. "Clara," he said warmly, "please, join us." Ethan and Ella were already seated, whispering and giggling softly. They waved at her, delighted that she was being treated as one of them. Clara hesitated but finally took her seat. Dinner began with polite conversation, mostly the twins excitedly telling their father how Clara taught them to bake muffins, or how she made them laugh until they cried. Alexander listened, smiling faintly, glancing at Clara from time to time. There was something calming about her presence, something he hadn't felt since his wife's passing. But not everyone in the room shared that warmth. At the far end, the butler, Mr. Rowe, watched in silence. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. He had served the Grant family for over 30 years, and to him, this scene was unthinkable. A maid, dining beside his employer. It was an insult to tradition, to order, to everything he upheld. Halfway through dinner, Alexander leaned closer to Clara. "You've done something I thought impossible," he said quietly. "You've brought them back to life." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "They just needed to feel safe again, sir. They missed being children." Before Alexander could reply, a shadow moved at the doorway. Mr. Rowe appeared, holding a thick folder against his chest. His face was pale, and his voice trembled slightly, though it carried an air of self-importance. "Sir, I must speak with you immediately," he said. Alexander frowned. "Can it not wait?" "I'm afraid not," Rowe replied. He stepped closer and placed the folder on the table in front of his employer. "It concerns the maid." Clara froze. Her heart began to pound in her chest. Alexander opened the folder slowly. Inside were photographs, old ones, faded and grainy. He flipped through them until his hand stopped. The image showed a hospital bed. His late wife, pale and frail, smiling faintly, and beside her stood Clara, younger, dressed in a nurse's uniform, holding her hand. The room went silent. Even the twins stopped whispering. Alexander's voice was cold when he finally spoke. "You knew my wife." Clara's throat tightened. "Yes," she said softly, tears already welling. "I was her nurse. She didn't tell you about me, but before she passed, she made me promise something." "What promise?" Alexander demanded, his voice shaking between anger and disbelief. Clara looked down at the twins, then back at him. "She asked me to find your children and make them laugh again. She said their father would be too lost in grief to remember how." For a long moment, no one moved. The twins looked at their father, confused, afraid. Clara stood trembling, her eyes wet, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Finally, Alexander stood, pushing his chair back with a heavy scrape. His expression softened, torn between pain and realization. "She said that," he whispered. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Every night she talked about you and the twins. She wasn't afraid of dying, she was afraid that you'd all stop living." The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't from coldness, it was heavy with emotion. The twins climbed out of their chairs and wrapped their arms around Clara. And Alexander, the man who hadn't cried in years, turned away, because his eyes had filled with tears he could no longer hide. That night, the mansion was quieter than usual, not with the old, heavy silence of sorrow, but with the delicate hush that follows truth. The air felt alive, trembling with emotions that words hadn't yet untangled. Alexander stood by the pool, staring at the moonlight rippling across the water. This was where it had all changed, where a clumsy fall had broken through 5 years of stillness. The same place his wife used to sit, watching the twins splash, her laughter echoing against the marble walls. He could almost see her reflection there now, soft and smiling. He didn't hear Clara approach until her reflection appeared beside his. She was still in her simple dress from dinner, her hair loose now, faintly glowing in the pale light. She hesitated before speaking, her voice quiet but steady. She loved this pool, Clara said. She told me about it often, in the hospital. Said it was her favorite place, because it was where the children learned to laugh, and where you used to forget you were busy being Alexander Grant, the millionaire. Alexander's jaw tightened. He didn't look at her right away. I stopped coming here after she died, he murmured. The sound of water reminded me of her. The laughter stopped, and so did I. Clara nodded. She said you would. She knew how deeply you loved her. She looked down at her hands. When she asked me to come here, I didn't think I could. I didn't belong in a world like this, marble halls, gold ceilings. But when I saw your children, I understood what she meant. They needed love, not wealth. Her words hit him harder than she intended. Alexander finally turned to face her. There was no accusation in his eyes now, only sorrow and gratitude, and something else he didn't dare name. I thought I'd given them everything, he said softly. But I gave them nothing that mattered. Clara took a small step closer, her eyes meeting his. You gave them life. You just forgot how to live it with them. For a long moment, they stood in silence. The wind whispered through the palm leaves, and the pool glimmered like liquid glass. Then small footsteps padded across the terrace. Ethan and Ella appeared, both in their pajamas, clutching their stuffed toys. We couldn't sleep, Ella mumbled. We wanted to be here, where Mama used to sit. Clara knelt, pulling them gently close. She's still here, she whispered. Every time you laugh, she's right here with you. The twins smiled faintly, dipping their toes into the cool water. Ethan splashed Ella, who shrieked with laughter, and soon the air filled with their giggles, pure and bright under the moonlight. Alexander watched them, his chest tightening. A sound escaped him, a quiet, broken chuckle that turned into a real smile. It was unfamiliar but freeing. Clara looked up at him and smiled too, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time in years, the mansion's heart began to beat again. The ghost of grief that had haunted it for so long seemed to drift away with the night breeze. But high above them, behind a second-floor window, Mr. Rowe watched through the glass. His face was half in shadow, his expression unreadable. He lifted a phone to his ear and spoke in a low, deliberate tone. Phase 1 is complete, he said. The family trusts her completely now. He ended the call, his reflection merging with the darkness. Below, by the shimmering pool, laughter echoed, soft, unknowing, and fragile, like the calm before a storm. The morning sun poured gently through the tall glass windows of the rebuilt Grant mansion. The smell of fresh paint and blooming gardenias drifted through the air, a reminder that the home, and everyone inside it, had been given a second chance. Weeks had passed since the fire. The once grand and hollow mansion was alive again with laughter and footsteps. The twins darted through the halls, their joy no longer rare or fragile. They laughed freely, shouted for attention, and ran to the woman who had become their world, Clara. She sat by the poolside, sketching quietly in a notebook. Her hair had grown back after the fire singed it, and a faint scar on her wrist was all that remained from that night she ran through flames to save the children. The twins splashed in the pool, playing a game of who could make the biggest wave. Miss Clara, Ethan called out. You're supposed to be the judge. Clara smiled, shading her eyes from the sun. All right, whoever gets me the wettest wins. A second later, twin waves crashed over her, soaking her dress. She squealed and laughed, the sound light and genuine. The twins burst into laughter too, falling against the pool edge, happy and carefree. From the terrace, Alexander watched them with quiet awe. He had seen many things in his life, business victories, fortunes made and lost, but nothing as extraordinary as the sound of his children laughing again. It was everything his late wife had wished for, and Clara had brought it back. He stepped down the marble stairs toward them, the sunlight catching on something in his hand, a small velvet box. Clara stood when she saw him approach, brushing her wet hair from her face, still laughing. Sir, I swear they started at this time, she said playfully. Alexander chuckled, stopping in front of her. I believe you. Though I think you enjoyed it just as much as they did. Before she could reply, he opened the box. Inside were 2 smaller rings, delicate silver bands, and one larger one that gleamed in the light. Clara blinked, confused. What are these? Alexander knelt slightly, smiling at the twins who had come running. For them, he said softly, slipping the smaller rings onto Ethan and Ella's tiny fingers. To remind them that family isn't something we're born into, it's something we build. Then he turned back to Clara, his voice lowering. And this one is for you. Her breath caught. Alexander. He took her hand gently. You came here as a maid. You stayed as a promise keeper. And somewhere along the way, you became the heart of this home. You brought back laughter, love, life itself. The twins watched wide-eyed as their father slipped the ring onto her finger. Ella gasped with joy, clapping her hands, while Ethan grinned. Does that mean she's our new mom? Clara's eyes filled with tears as she knelt down and hugged them both tightly. Only if you want me to be, she whispered. Ethan squeezed her back. We already do. Alexander's voice was thick with emotion when he added quietly, so do I. The 4 of them stood together by the pool, the same place where laughter had returned, where pain had been healed, and where a broken family had found itself whole again. The butler who once watched them in secret was gone, justice served. The shadows that haunted the mansion had lifted, replaced by light, laughter, and the promise of a new beginning. As the twins splashed water into the sky, the drops glittered like diamonds in the sunlight. Clara looked up, her hand still in Alexander's, and for the first time, the reflection in the pool didn't look lonely. It looked alive, a family, reborn in love.